doing your thing?
Actually, I'm not teaching again until next summer, so I'm doing a lot of writing. I'm finishing a biography of Mark Hatfield. I think I mentioned that before.
Sure.
So yeah, so that's what I'm
Yeah,
working.
that's interesting. We should talk about that sometime because my father and I both knew him.
Yeah, I know. You know what? And I have determined that he was the first evangelical to come out against abortion after Roe
Yeah,
v. Wade.
yeah,
He filed legislation in the Senate on, I believe, May 1st of
yeah,
1973.
yeah,
And Falwell didn't come out until more than 5 years later. So
yeah,
after Roe v. Wade. So
yeah. No, Mark is an interesting person. Let me introduce you properly. We're going live here on YouTube. Um, my name is Frank Schaeffer, and this is my podcast In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. And my guest today is Professor Randall Balmer. And Randall, in addition to being a good friend of mine, is a prize-winning historian and Emmy Award nominee and ordained Episcopal priest. He is the John Phillips Professor of Religion at Dartmouth College and the author of many books, including the just released America's Best Idea, The Separation of Church and State, which, as I mentioned to Randall a moment ago, is just as ripped from the headlines as you can get. Um, this is In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer, and I'm asking you to subscribe right now to YouTube, where this is live streaming and will also just be around forever, I guess, or until they run out of electricity to make all those AI things work, whichever comes first.
right.
And I would ask you also to take a look at In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, where this will also be a podcast. And also my Substack page, it has to be said, which is a commentary page at substack.substack.com. And you may also follow my new project, The Gospel of Zip, which is a book and also something I'm reading aloud for free on YouTube that will be launched November 1 at thegospelofzip.com. And then in February, we are making Randall's new book, a has to be read book club offering. So America's Best Idea will be our book club in February. So just there it is. Can you just read the title again and the subtitle?
America's Best Idea, The Separation of Church and State.
Yeah, and I would be holding the book up here, except I read it on Kindle where I have all my notes. So, Randall, I'm going to do something strange here. I hope it's not too off-putting. In going through the book, I pulled out a bunch of quotes from various places in the book, some from the end, some from the middle, some from the beginning, that I've sort of strung together to kind of give people a flavor of the subject matter. And then we'll look at specific things that you said in the book. So I'm going to read this. I'd ask you to read from your own book, but you don't know how I've ordered these quotes. So this is my open. And this is from Randall's book, America's Best Idea. The collusion between rationalists and evangelicals, symbolically between Roger Williams and Thomas Jefferson, that produced the First Amendment has bequeathed to the United States a vibrant and salubrious religious culture unmatched anywhere in the world. The First Amendment, just as Adam Smith predicted in his 1776 treatise on capitalism, The Wealth of Nations, set up a free market for religion where religious entrepreneurs, to extend the economic metaphor, are free to peddle their wares in the marketplace without either prejudice or favoritism from the state. Powerful enemies have mobilized against the First Amendment in recent years. Leaders of the religious right, in particular, have sought to collapse the wall of separation between church and state. Religion and Christianity are the two biggest things missing from this country, Trump declared. This coming from a self-confessed sexual predator and someone who, according to independent sources, issued more than 30,000 false or misleading statements during his first 4 years in office. Were I to identify a foil for this book, it would be those voices breezily claiming that the United States is and always has been a Christian nation. That assertion is demonstrably false. Those same voices have sought and continue to seek the diminution of the First Amendment and its wall of separation between church and state. That, in my view, is a dangerous course. No group has benefited more from the First Amendment than evangelicals, the very cohort that is now trying to breach the wall of separation between church and state in the name of Christian nationalism. And therein lies danger, too close an association between church and state. So If Christian nationalism has no theological underpinning and no warrant in American history, what is the appeal? Why would so many white evangelicals respond to the demonstrably false statements of David Barton or covet a God Bless the USA Bible that bundles the King James Version with the Pledge of Allegiance and the nation's charter documents? As it happens, I was one of the expert witnesses in the so-called Ten Commandments case in Alabama. My testimony was that the First Amendment and the separation of church and state was the best thing that ever happened to religion in the United States. The emergence of the religious right in the mid 1970s provided American evangelicals with a new vocabulary for talking about religious freedom and, in many ways, upended their prior approaches to the relationship between church and state. And all of those quotes, pieced together by me, are from America's Best Idea, The Separation of Church and State, which is now out. And I would urge everybody to get and read this book. It's only 124 pages. It's beautifully written, as you know, because you've just listened to me read bits and pieces of it. And it will be my book club offering in February. So welcome anyway, Randall. I hope you don't feel that I bastardized the text too much by mixing and matching, but I thought that would give a flavor of what you're talking about.
Not at all, Frank. Thank you. It's good to be here, and thanks for the. Yeah, I forgot I wrote some of those things. So thank you.
Yeah, well, there you are. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it, when it's
Sure.
read? I mean, it's like, oh, yeah,
Did I write that?
yeah, you did. So let's first put this book in the context of your own work and life and experience that I allude to by reading that quote about you testifying in that case. You're a historian and you're a historian of religious American history. So the first thing I want to tell people who are listening to this is that not only does Randall know what he's talking about, as a practicing minister of the gospel, as an Anglican priest, he is committed to his own Christian faith. So the idea that this somehow can be dismissed as, the hate mongering of a left-wing fanatic is totally ridiculous. Randall's a Christian. He loves the gospel of Jesus Christ. He preaches, he teaches history. And this book is by, therefore, a scholar who has deigned to communicate with ordinary folks like me so that I can understand his text, even though he is an academic. This book is for everybody. And I just hope people read it because of all the subjects we could be talking about today, I guess this cuts to the heart of America's number one problem right now because the idea of the separation of church and state is not only under attack as an idea, it's being attacked by people who want to replace it with a theocracy, with a Christian nationalism that is very much in your face right now. And to get there, they have to deny the very history that you are at pains in 124 pages to lay out in detail and in a way that people can understand. So place this book in the context of your other work and your own life experience first, and then let's get into the details.
Sure. Well, as you know, Frank, I grew up, as you did, within what I call the evangelical subculture. My father was a minister for 40 years in the Evangelical Free Church. And as I've said before, I honor both his ministry and his memory. So I'm very much within that camp. We'd have a longer conversation about how comfortable I feel with evangelicalism these days. I don't feel I've left evangelicalism. I feel like evangelicalism has left me
Yeah.
with its stampede toward the political right, which is an utter betrayal, I believe,
Mm.
of both the New Testament as well as the noble history of evangelical political activism throughout American
Yeah.
history. So, that's a different conversation, a longer conversation, perhaps sometime. So I'm very much within the tradition. As you said, I'm an ordained minister. I consider myself a person of faith, or at least I aspire to be. And so this is not a book written by some sort of heedless secularist.
Mm.
I I honor the First Amendment. I consider it America's best idea for two reasons, really. First of all, it has shielded the state from the ravages of religious contestation, such as the founders were well aware of back in Europe with the wars of religion in France, with the English Revolution in Britain. And the founders wanted a different paradigm. So they
Yeah.
wanted to repeat that in the New World. And second, I think I honor the First Amendment because it has shielded the faith from corruptions of the state. And you mentioned my being an expert witness in the Alabama Ten Commandments case. And the
Yeah.
story I like to tell about that is that when Judge Thompson ruled correctly that the monument, because Judge Roy Moore had um, ruled out any other religious displays in that public space, only the
Yeah.
Ten Commandments. When Judge Thompson ruled correctly that that violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, and ordered the monument removed, one of the protesters screamed, "Get your hands off my God."
Hmm.
You and I both know that one of those commandments says something about graven images.
Yeah.
And that, I think, was precisely Roger Williams' point
Yeah.
about wanting to shield the garden of the church from the wilderness of the world by too
Yeah.
close an association between church and state.
Well, and for anybody who doubts that this has been good for religion, you just look at the difference between the more secularized Western European countries
Yes.
and the United States of America. I mean, right now we have a fall off in people going to church for many, many reasons, but still nothing comparable
That's
to
right.
what's happened in every single other Western country, including the United Kingdom.
That's right. Yeah.
So demonstrably, if numbers of people in church who say they're believers, including the ability to create a Christian nationalist movement,
Right.
you know, it's
Right.
been good. It's been
Yeah.
good for these guys.
Well,
And
we're off the charts. Yeah, you're right. We're
well,
off the charts.
we're off the chart when it comes to religion, and nobody else is. Not in
No,
the
exactly.
Western,
That's
not in the Western developed world.
You,
Okay, so
you mentioned Britain. Let me just quickly
yeah,
interject this. The last time I checked, and believe me, Frank, the last time I checked was about 30 years ago. But
yeah,
the last time I checked, fewer than 3% of the people in Britain attended the Church of England, the
yeah,
established church, the state church,
right,
any given Sunday. I expect it's probably half or a third of that
yeah.
today. And
Well,
that's
and to the extent that the state church is the Roman Catholic Church in, for instance, Italy or
sure.
France or Spain, the numbers would be comparable in terms of people who actually go.
Right, exactly.
There might be a little higher number of people baptized who are never seen there again, but
Right.
obviously our American situation is unique in how many people not only call themselves Christians but go to church. So I don't think that's debatable. I'm going to go back through the text of your book, sort of more in order now. You talk about various people, and I'm going to just quote something and ask you to explain who we're talking about here. Williams sought to protect religion from the depredations of the state, and he saw strict separation as a way to accomplish this. If God, Williams believed, will ever please to restore his garden and paradise again, it must be of necessity. It must of necessity be walled in, particularly to himself from the world, and that all that shall be saved out of the world are to be transplanted out of the wilderness of the world and added unto his church garden. So who are we talking about, and when did that happen?
This is Roger Williams, who is, of course, as you know, the founder of the Baptist tradition in America. And
Yeah,
what I find so striking about that metaphor, and what we miss, I think, as people in the 21st century, is that Roger Williams, I like to say, was not a member of the Sierra Club. That is to
yeah,
say, he didn't share our romantic notions about wilderness. So
yeah.
when he talks about shielding the garden of the church from the
Mm,
wilderness of the world, his principal concern was protecting the faith from too close an association with the state, because when it's associated with the state, it becomes fetishized or trivialized. And we're seeing this now in Oklahoma and Texas, other places want to post the Ten Commandments in the classroom and that sort of thing. And I don't know about you, Frank, but if these are Christian nationalists, why the Ten Commandments? I mean,
yeah,
why not the Sermon on the Mount or
yeah,
Matthew
yeah.
25 if they really
Well,
were?
there's a modern instance of the church and state being unsheltered that comes to mind now, and that's the close association of Vladimir Putin to the
Sure,
Orthodox Church backing his
absolutely.
war in Ukraine, while Russians themselves are not going to church in any large numbers. This
Right.
is this is an this is an unchurched population with the state closely associating with the church and then being endorsed by the Bishop of Moscow in a very unjust war. It's about as messy and ugly as it can possibly be.
You're absolutely
And
right.
that's exactly what Williams was trying to not have happened, because that, of course, had been the history of the church in Europe,
Right.
and not just the Anglicans and Elizabeth and Henry VIII and all these guys in that part of the world, but everything that had happened. So there's a good history that should alarm people. So let me just keep going here. Whereas Williams used his, quote, lively experiment in North America to secure concessions from the English government, William Penn, the other transatlantic visionary of the 17th century, used his government connection in England to launch a, quote, holy experiment in the middle colonies. Since the late 1660s, Penn had been advancing theories about the importance of individual conscience, warning magistrates that, quote, their authority cannot reasonably extend beyond the end for which it was appointed, which being not to enthrone themselves sovereign moderators in causes purely conscientious, end quote. Government, Penn believes, should tend to civil matters only, not religion. So tell us a little bit about Penn.
Yeah, Penn wanted to try something new, and that is to allow religious diversity to flourish in Pennsylvania. Of course, he was a Quaker, so he wanted to,
Yeah,
he was rooting for the Quakers, you might say.
yeah,
But he also allowed other groups to be present as well. And here you have in colonial Pennsylvania, I think it's fascinating because a lot of German groups found refuge there.
yeah,
Not only the Moravians, but you had the Amish, the Mennonites, and my favorite group, the Schwenkfelders, were there.
yeah.
A small group, which is still around a little bit. There's just a tiny remnant of Schwenkfelders still around today. But he saw this as a way to nourish diversity, and he thought that was a good
Yeah,
thing.
you say Penn's holy experiment, and quote, harbored a variety of religious and ethnic groups, including Swedes, Dutch, German, Scots, French, as well as Anglicans, Lutherans, Presbyterians, Baptists, and of course Quakers, which he was. By 1692, Pennsylvania even tolerated the public celebration of the Roman Catholic Mass, the
Right?
only American colony to do so. I thought that was so interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And he saw that as a good thing that leads to political stability. And again, the founders pick up on this. And
Yeah,
that's what's so important about this argument is that in this conversation is that the founders were well aware that diversity had really worked in the middle colonies, not only in
yeah,
Pennsylvania, but certainly in New York, you had a whole melange of religious groups in New York and well
yeah,
before that in New Netherland when it was under the Dutch.
yeah.
And same thing with New Jersey. It
Yeah,
was
and you say, but Penn's holy experiment and Williams' lively experiment provided models for the configuration of church and state. So basically, that's sort of early in your book, but it's also the beginning of the story of something very wise and very wonderful that happened in America and that has been challenged before, as you point out in your book, in several instances where people wanted to make it more Christian. But correct me if I'm wrong, but in the past, that was always successfully pushed back.
it was. Yeah, yeah,
Whereas now it seems to me, and I don't want to miss going through the book, which we will get back to, but unless I'm wrong, it seems to me now the danger with a president sitting in the White House who has pocketed this group of people as his people, not that he himself is a religious person, but that Christian state, that idea of state religion, um, Christian consensus has changed to the point where, for the first time in American history, it might be possible that that faction actually wins and undoes Penn's work
yeah.
and everybody else's work in terms of the founding documents. I think that's a very real danger.
I think it is too, and it utterly violates both the letter and the spirit of our charter documents. I
Yeah,
often say that what makes me patriotic is not waving flags or wearing silly red caps. What makes me patriotic is my sense that over the arc of American history,
yeah,
we Americans have always sought to live into the ideals of the charter document. Now, we've been far too slow
yeah,
with people of color, with women, and let's not even talk about Native Americans. I mean,
yeah,
far too slow. But that has generally been our trajectory. I don't think there's any question that we're stalled right now.
yeah,
No question about that. And I think the challenge is to make sure that we don't take a U-turn and renege on some of
yeah,
those those advances.
yeah.
But that's a real danger right now.
You go to Madison, of course, and you say what followed from Madison's pen, as amended by the Senate and the House of Representatives, was a triumph. 16 words in spare prose that set a new course for religion and politics, church and state. Quote, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. End quote. For perhaps the
Beautiful.
first time in history, especially in the West, A government pledged to stay out of the scrum of designating one religion as the favorite of the state, thereby guaranteeing both free exercise of religion and freedom from established religion. And Americans have gotten used to this, but it is unique.
It is. It's extraordinary. It was a breakthrough. It was, and Frank, I'm genuinely. I'm not. This is not. I'm not being theatrical. I'm
Yeah,
genuinely confounded by this. The
yeah,
very people who have benefited most
yeah,
from this free marketplace of religion, which is set up
yeah,
in the First Amendment, that is evangelicals,
yeah,
because
exactly.
evangelicals know instinctively how to speak the idiom of the culture.
Yeah,
The very people who have benefited most are now spearheading this effort to
yeah.
undermine the First Amendment. I'm genuinely gobsmacked by that. I'm not being histrionic about it.
But there's a
It's
strange inconsistency there that
really
isn't
is.
specifically in your book, but is the message of the book. And that is the reason they have profited from the system is the same reason that capitalism has worked instead of
Yes,
socialism. And that is that
yes,
when everything is concentrated in state fiat, it doesn't work very well. Whereas the freedom of association, the freedom of the press, but also our capitalist system, whatever one thinks of it, nevertheless has been extraordinarily successful, for instance,
yes,
compared to Soviet Union or all the
sure.
socialist systems in Europe, which are floundering now because of centralized planning. So the funny thing is the mentality of the right wing in general, conservatives, at least more old-fashioned conservatives, was to understand that the free market works.
Right.
And yet all of a sudden these Christian nationalists want to undo everything that has made them prosper.
Exactly.
So, Pete Hesgeth is part of a church group of 200 churches that's headed up by a man who's puts himself forward as a leader of the Christian nationalist movement. But of course, if you asked him about the American economy, he would be against state control of the
Yes.
economy. He would call that socialism or communism, but they want to do the same thing to religion. And of course, it will stunt it. And we see all over Western Europe what happens. These are all state churches.
Yeah, yeah. It makes no sense. It makes no sense. And
So then the next bit here, the story of the church and state in the United States would be far simpler if the First Amendment had settled the matter once and for all, but its interpretation has been contested ever since ratification. A bit later, you say, when John Adams, the nation's second president, declared a national day of fasting, riots broke out among some of the smaller religious groups whose members feared that the government was overstepping its bounds. That's something I didn't know. I was so interested to learn that in your book. Talk about that. That's stunning.
yeah, it's well, in the early years of the nation, we were trying to figure out, the founders were trying to figure out how is this going to work?
Yeah,
And so, for example, the whole tradition which has persisted to the present day of having a chaplain for the Senate and the House of Representatives. Thomas Jefferson was not terribly enthusiastic about this.
yeah,
The whole idea of declaring national days of fasting and prayer. Again, Jefferson had his qualms about that, but he was also savvy enough politically to pick his battles.
yeah,
And so he realized, especially with the issue of the chaplaincy, that, he wasn't going to win that one. And so
yeah,
we still have a chaplain in the Senate and in the House of Representatives. I'm not sure that that's all that bad.
yeah.
You know, if I'm going to clean up this wall of separation between church and state, I'd probably look to other issues first before tackling that one.
It's interesting. You talk about George Washington again, things that, maybe I knew at one point, but have forgotten. As a young man, Washington had joined the Masons, a secret fraternal order that claims a history dating to the cathedral builders of medieval Europe. In matters of faith, Washington, who was not conventionally religious, nevertheless understood the importance of religious toleration. Quote, I trust the people of every denomination will be convinced that I shall always strive to prove a faithful and impartial patron of genuine vital religion, end quote. Washington wrote to the Methodist bishops in 1789, quote, no one would be more zealous than myself to establish effectual barriers against the horrors of spiritual tyranny
Mhm.
and every species of religious persecution. So this is not just early in our country, this is George Washington talking.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And we have to be clear too that the founders understood the value of religion as a way of engendering morality within the nation. They understood
Yeah,
that. I'm not denying that for a moment,
sure.
but they were also equally adamant that you did not have a religious establishment. That
Yeah,
was
and in terms of religious establishment and a kind of a Protestant, an informal, soft theocracy at one point, this sort of
right.
speaks to it. I recently doing a history podcast I like very much. The Rest is History with Dominic Sandbrook and Tom Holland, and they were doing a thing on the Kennedy assassination. Of course, you can't do the Kennedy story without talking about the fact Kennedy had to give speech after speech saying, even though I'm a Roman Catholic, I'll still be an American president.
Right.
I won't be controlled by the Pope and so forth.
Right.
And what was interesting in reading your book, Washington sought to live by those ideals when he commissioned Benedict Arnold to undertake military campaign to persuade the people of Quebec, predominantly Roman Catholic, to cooperate in resisting the British. Washington had instructed Arnold to show religious toleration, quote, contempt of the religion of a country by ridiculing any of its ceremonies or affronting its ministers or votaries has ever been deeply resented, he wrote. Quote, you are to be particularly careful to restrain every officer and soldier from such imprudence and folly, and to punish every instance of it, end quote. Having warned against intolerance, the general continued, on the other hand, as far as lays in your power, you are to protect and support the free exercise of religion of the country and the undisturbed enjoyment of the conscience in religious matters with your utmost influence and authority. And that particularly speaks to me because, of course, I grew up in an evangelical fundamentalist family, and part of our mission was to the quote, lost, unsaved Roman
Sure.
Catholics who
Sure.
were surely destined to go to hell if
Sure.
I was to believe my mother at, say, 1958, as were Hindus, Muslims, and Jews. They had not properly come to Christ. They believed in Mary. They did all these things.
Right.
And here we have George Washington saying, be very careful to honor the conscience. And again, I don't think most Americans understand that the deep echoes in our past of religious toleration that shaped our founding,
Yeah.
irrespective of the documents.
That's right. That's right. No, absolutely right.
I love that example in the book. I mean,
Yeah.
it was terrific.
Yeah, right. And we have to say too that the side that's arguing for Christian nationalism is making these preposterous claims that 53 out of the 55 founders were evangelical Christians or something.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, which is nonsense.
it's utter nonsense. I mean,
Yeah, and
it
completely made up from whole cloth. I mean, fits very well with Trump's, fact-free
yep,
mission as a whole, his kind of weird way of doing things and just outright lying. And then, of course, the evangelicals who push for this, this is not history.
no,
So, and you get to that in your book. Washington understood the importance of religious freedom. The citizens of the United States of America have the right to applaud themselves for having given to mankind examples of an enlarged and liberal policy worthy of imitation, he wrote um, to members of the Touro synagogue in Newport, Rhode Island. So he's writing to Jews
yep,
at that time saying that he's proud because we have offered to mankind examples of an enlarged and liberal policy worthy of imitation. So this is his word to the Jewish community, as early in American history as you can get.
right, exactly. And the people in Newport are very proud about this. I did a book event with this book
Yeah.
a couple of months ago, and this is just one of these shining moments in the founding of the United States about religious toleration and exactly what we're talking about.
And one very direct thing that you've got in your book, great example, the Senate ratified the Treaty of Tripoli
Yes.
unanimously, without debate on June 7, 1797. The language of Article 11 is pretty clear. Quote, the government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. End quote. So anyone arguing that the United States is a Christian nation would need to explain away both Article 11 of the Treaty of Tripoli as well as the Senate's unanimous ratification of the treaty. So it's kind of funny because they're saying, well, all the founders were evangelical Christians like me, and yet that group of men is unanimously ratifying a statement that is as clear as anything can be. So just talk about that for a minute, because
Well,
the
and
Treaty of Tripoli.
the other thing is, Frank, as you know, a lot of these people arguing for Christian nationalism are also arguing this silly constitutional doctrine of originalism, right?
Yeah, of
We
course.
go back to the original intent of the founder. And the Treaty of Tripoli, Article 11 states, as the United States of America, as the
Right.
government of the United States is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion. That was their
Yeah.
understanding. Same thing with Thomas Jefferson. David Barton, who's the guy who's making up all this nonsense about Christian nationalism,
Yeah.
makes a big point about saying that the phrase separation of church and state does not appear in the Constitution. Well, he's absolutely right about that. I give him that point. But
Yeah.
Thomas Jefferson, writing to the Baptists in Danbury, Connecticut,
Yeah.
that quotes the First Amendment and says, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. So, again, these people are originalists or claim to be originalists.
Yeah.
They should pay attention to what the founders meant. And the
Well,
founders,
including Washington writing to the leaders of a Jewish synagogue saying, we're proud of the fact that, not only do we have room for you, we're known for this. And of course, the context of the history that you're writing, um, it has to be pointed out again and again, is that these founding documents were being crafted at a time when the fruit of endless wars of religion in Europe between
right,
official states that had recognized religion, the burning of heretics on both sides, Protestants being burned, Catholics being burned.
right.
The smoke was fresh in the air of all this
Yeah,
carnage
right.
and horror. So this wasn't in some sort of theoretical vacuum. They were saying, hey, whatever we are, we're not going to be this. Been
Right.
there, done that for the last 1,500 years,
That's right.
enough. We're trying something new here. And I don't think people understand how radical a departure that was from the way everybody else in the world was doing it.
It was a radically new idea. You're absolutely right about that. And that's the beauty of it. And that's why I call it America's best idea, because the other thing is, Frank, it's worked. It's
It has
worked
worked.
remarkably well for
It
over
has worked.
200 years. And why you want these people now want to change that is just, again, it's confounding to me.
Yeah.
I just don't understand why you would want to do that. It's worked so well. I have a quote toward the end, which you probably noticed, and from Sandra Day O'Connor,
Yeah.
and in her final opinion on church-state matters before she retired from the Supreme Court, those who would renegotiate the boundaries between church and state must answer a difficult question. Why would we trade a system that has served us so well
Yeah.
for one that has served others so poorly? I think it.
Well, and I'll put something very naughtily and bluntly here, which is not in your book. So don't blame Randall for this. You can blame me. And that is, evangelicals have not only done very well spiritually, in filling their churches, but a lot of evangelical leaders have also done very well financially. So they are literally killing the golden goose here because, as I somewhat facetiously refer to it, the God cash will go away if we
Yeah.
become a quote Christian nation, because the freedom that we have assumed you can just start a church on any corner. Because believe me, if I know these Christian nationalists, it won't just be evangelical Christianity will be favored, it will be their particular
Yep.
denominational view will be favored. And
Right.
if you don't believe that, then just watch how these evangelical groups fight each other,
Yeah.
um, and diminish each other. So it's not just there's a sort of an evangelical papacy. There isn't. So what it means is that America becomes a quote Christian nation. What it really becomes is a nation at war with itself, with all these little groups going up against each other, jockeying for dominance in the
Yep.
same way some of these evangelical advisors to Trump have jockeyed for dominance for, say, the Pentecostal or charismatic type of Christianity that,
Sure.
has been more effective in whispering in his ear. So if I was a Southern Baptist, I would not be particularly pleased to see Paula White up there
Right.
whispering in Trump's ear, because if it be, the people who are closest to the oligarchical kind of structure we've got now will be those who are actually wind up in power. And we don't want to go that way. Hey, that's the whole history of France.
Right. That's right. Yeah.
That's the whole history of the United Kingdom since the Reformation, between Elizabeth and all the rest of it.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
we've
Well,
done this.
yeah. And you got Paula White on one hand, and you've got Doug Wilson on the other. I mean,
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
talk about contestation.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Had Madison not blocked Patrick Henry's attempt to designate Christianity as the official religion of Virginia, Jefferson's remarkable legislation would not have been enacted. Years later, Madison reflected on the benefits of church-state separation, both personal piety and civil society, he wrote in 1819, so we're getting later now, had been, quote, manifestly increased by the total separation of church from state. So these guys, some of them were around long enough to see it starting to
Yeah.
work.
Right. Right. Yeah, there's a famous quote from Jefferson, "We have solved by fair experiment." And
Yeah,
then I don't have the exact quote in front of me. What happens when we disestablish religion? He said, "Look, it works." And
yeah,
as I said, both. I mean, in many ways, the two opposing figures in the book are Roger Williams and Thomas Jefferson,
yeah,
who couldn't be
absolutely.
more different religiously. I mean,
Yeah,
Jefferson admired Jesus, but he didn't think he was divine.
yeah,
And Williams, of course, was founder of the Baptist tradition in America.
yeah,
And what I'm trying to argue is that Jefferson's wish for a government that was free of religious factionalism
yeah.
worked, but also Williams' vision of a faith that was not impeded by the workings of the state also works. So then
Yeah.
that's why the separation of church and state is, I think, America's best idea.
Well, and when you look at the photographs of the Reverend Billy Graham's rallies in the 50s and 60s, those full stadiums were full precisely because we had the freedom of religion for him to do that, and there was not a state church, so
That's right.
he could go do his thing. And again, I don't want to push this too far, but the the relationship to the free market and capitalism and the success versus the Eastern Bloc countries, is exactly mirrored in state churches' lack of success worldwide and what we've done here. And evangelical Christians don't get this. There wouldn't be more church or more Christians or more success or more evangelism or more anything if this was a quote unquote Christian nationalist
Right.
culture. If those guys win, it's the evangelical outreach that will suffer far more than the secular people.
That's right. Absolutely. And the other thing, Frank, is as I look at the charter documents, the founders were very clear that we were not a majoritarian society. That
Exactly.
is to say, a society where, let's say, for example, that a majority of Americans were Christian,
Mm,
or that which is true, right? And at least, not saying anything about the quality of faith, but nevertheless,
sure.
self-identity. Let's say the majority of Americans were vegetarian.
Yeah.
Would that mean that all Americans should be
Mm,
vegetarian? Let's think
mm.
about that.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and I mean, as a vegetarian myself, I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea. But the point is that the founders sought to ensure the rights and the prerogatives of minorities.
Yeah, and
And
the crazy,
that's the
yeah,
beauty of this
and
charter
also gave
document.
us the right to make mistakes.
Yeah, sure,
And
absolutely.
so, when Trump and the far right push against environmental protection, for instance, one of their arguments, which has resonance with a lot of Americans, is, well, why should I have to conform what I do in my garden, the kind of what I spray on my lawn, to some ideal being imposed? In every we Americans, rightly or wrongly, I'm not debating that point specifically, but we instinctively push back against
Yeah,
the idea of state control.
right,
That's where the right has triumphed. Deregulation is the watchword of the day. And when it comes to Christian nationalism, it's the exact opposite of that.
right, right. Yeah.
So
No,
anyway,
yeah,
there's lots going on. You write, at various times in American history, citizens have paused to notice that the U.S. Constitution contains no direct acknowledgement of God, which is certainly an inconvenient detail for those who want to insist that America is and always was a Christian nation. The Confederacy, this is really interesting,
yeah,
and I hadn't thought of this until you put it in your book. Of many things I hadn't thought of until I read them here. Great book. The Confederacy seized on this during the Civil War, arguing against the legitimacy of the Union because of this apparent omission, all the while careful to ensure that the Confederate Constitution invoked, quote, the favor and guidance of God, Almighty God. So, here we have the Confederacy defending the institution of slavery by invoking Almighty God. And unfortunately, that's all too much of the moment as well. So that it's not that we invoke the Almighty God and then all of a sudden there's more freedom for everyone. This was used to passionately defend the slave trade.
right, yeah. And that the Confederate Constitution kicked off a reaction in the North among Protestant ministers,
Sure.
this movement that became known as the National Reform Association, which was headed by a justice on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, William Strong, who was later appointed to the Supreme Court by Ulysses S. Grant. And they went to Abraham Lincoln
Yeah.
with their proposed amendment to the Constitution, which would, add all this Christian language. And Lincoln wisely temporized. The task of amending the Constitution should not be undertaken lightly. In other words,
Yeah.
I'll get back to you. And
I'll
he
get back
never
to you on
did.
this.
I
Not
mean,
a good
wisely. I
idea.
mean, this was he was able to forestall that, and that obviously is a good thing, I think.
Well, and I think the precedent that is set there is we've always had, America's always been a bubbling cauldron. There's nothing new. In other words, everything the religious right is saying now, or any figment of American politics is saying, has always been with us. But the difference is now they haven't had a representative in the White House using every means at his disposal and some that shouldn't be at his disposal to bolster this agenda. Because as far as he's concerned, these are the people that got him elected, and he's fine with all of this because they support him.
Right. And we're not even a year into the 4-year term, so it's
Yeah.
frightening to think about this. It
I'm
really.
going off script here a little bit, and I want to get back to a quote here that starts the push for a constitutional amendment also engendered opposition on February 28, 1872. Carl Schurz, U.S. Senator from Missouri, presented Congress with a petition with more than 10,000 signatures from across the nation, asking Congress to preserve inviolate the great guarantees of religious liberty and protesting against an amendment to the Constitution establishing religious tests. So I'm just mentioning that it isn't like this is a new battle that you've decided to write a book about. This is just the warp and woof of American history. Again, the difference being is that we're now in a period of the ascendancy of an idea that
Right.
has always been firmly pushed back by the majority of Americans and the government, no matter who's in power. We're now facing a different situation.
We are, and the strategies have changed as well. Whereas in the 19th century and even in the Cold War, there were attempts to amend the Constitution. Now, the religious right. I mean, this is where it's coming from. The religious right is taking a different approach. That is
Yeah.
working through the states where they have supermajorities in the legislature and a Republican governor in order to undermine things. And the other thing we haven't talked about yet, and I'm sure you want to get to it, is the Supreme Court.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I like to say, I wish the Supreme Court had half as much deference for the First Amendment as it does for the Second Amendment.
Yeah.
In other words, always big on the right to bear arms, but
Yeah.
the notion of religious disestablishment is very much imperiled by the Supreme Court. And
Well,
recent
there's a
decisions.
there's a good bridge there because these two things are related in that the same group of people,
Yeah,
speaking in a terrible generalization, but it's true here in terms of their leadership and a lot of the rank and file, who, very much are all about guns and so forth, are collecting those guns to protect themselves as a diminishing Christian minority against them, whoever them are,
right,
you and me or whoever else out there that's
right,
coming to get them as they see it. And, while the Supreme Court supports their right to arm themselves with, weapons of war, automatic, semi-automatic things like AR-15s, et cetera, when it comes to expanding this right of say vouchers for Christian schools, charter schools, Catholic schools, and this kind of thing, we're really burning the candle at both ends because on one hand, we're enabling and in the case of Trump pardoning the insurrectionists who charged the Capitol, often with these motivations. They're defending their country from the godless people who are going to, turn back America from its Christian inheritance. So this is all one story, actually, what the Supreme Court's doing in enlarging those, quote, liberties, both
yeah.
to bear arms, but also to run Christian schools with government financing or whatever it may be. So talk about that because the court's really important and they're sort of in the middle of all this, but playing both sides. And in the end, the right wing keeps winning and also feeding the right wing paranoia because when you go to a lot of these armed groups and militias and other people, they are arming to defend themselves against the government,
Right.
as if somehow the government is a government of an alien nation and not our own government. So
Yeah.
I know there's too much there that I've said, but just talk a little bit about all that because this is really crazy. This is really a crazy moment when it comes to all these things converging.
You're absolutely right. And ostensibly, we need to arm the citizenry against tyranny.
Yeah,
We're pretty close right now, it seems to
yeah,
me. But the other thing is, where are the originalists in the gun debate, right?
Yeah,
I mean, if they were truly originalists, so we'd be talking about muskets and things of that sort rather than
yeah.
AR-15s or whatever they are, these automatic weapons. I
But it's
mean,
funny because these
yeah,
armed people who are going to defend us against the intrusive US government that's supposedly secular while they're Christian, on the other hand, right now, ICE agents that are fully masked with no nameplates and no way to identify who they are dragging people into unmarked vans and driving away with them, which would be the sort of imagery out of a right-wing nationalist movie of what they would expect the government to do
right,
to us that we are arming to protect ourselves against.
right,
But when it comes to dragging people off the street, we have masked agents of the law acting in a way that any militia group out there training somewhere in Michigan is supposedly arming to defend ourselves against, because this is exactly the sort
right,
of thing that they have been predicting.
right,
And now it's actually happening. They have no problem with that.
right. Yeah, yeah. It's
So
almost
how do you figure all that?
well, I mean, it's almost one of these apocalyptic movies that that
Yeah,
that appeared in the 1970s. And as you probably
yeah,
know, my father was in A Thief in the Night,
yeah.
the film that depicted some of this. You know, the
Actually, yeah,
heavy-handed arm of the state trying to trying to quash religious freedom, and this is
yeah.
what we're facing today in real time.
Yeah, and what's ironic, of course, I always think is sort of a bitter irony here, and that is the brown people often being hauled off are Central and South American Pentecostal Christians who
Right.
have exactly the same theology as the people arming themselves to defend themselves against the godless state.
Yeah.
So, if we were interested in defending Christianity, in fact, if you wanted a Christian nation, numerically, you would open the southern border and invite more Pentecostal Christians in because they actually agree with you on a host of social issues and all these other things. So, the lie that's given to this is seen in the fact that most of the people being hauled into the back of vans are Roman Catholic believers or Pentecostal charismatic Christians who believe exactly the same things as the people who think that we have to defend ourselves against the godless state. And that's not a conjecture on my part. That's factual because
Yeah.
the South and Central American cohort are these are Pentecostal Christians a lot of the time.
Yeah, that's right. You're absolutely right. Boy, Frank, we've really gotten ourselves into a tangle here, haven't we, in this
Yeah, we
conversation?
have. And the thing is, I don't know, you're an academic and so forth and so on, but I don't think people understand the urgency of what your book, America's Best Idea, is about, in the sense that this isn't just another subject, because if this pillar of our democracy goes, all is lost.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. Yeah, and and there was a reason that the founders made this the First Amendment. I mean, this is the First Amendment.
That's right. We will not federalize your faith.
Right, exactly.
This is the point.
That's right.
And if that goes, then everything else goes,
Right,
because that's where all our freedoms come from, is this
right.
ability to think and worship and act.
That's right. Well, and it's also worth probably talking about what these Christian nationalists want to do. That
Yeah,
is, they want to delegalize same-sex marriage and abortion and even
sure.
divorce in some of those cases.
Yeah,
But the more radical ones, and you know these folks as well as I do, the Reconstructionists want to recast American civil and criminal law according to their understanding of Leviticus primarily. They love Leviticus for some
yeah,
reason.
yeah.
They're drawn to that. And think about what the nation would look like if they get their way.
Well,
And
we know what it would look like because we can see what the Taliban's doing in Afghanistan.
yeah, very similar.
Been there, done that. And you're right. Unfortunately, in its conservative majority, newly fortified with two Donald Trump appointments, reversed course in Espinoza versus Montana Department of Revenue, not only weakening the Establishment Clause, but also opening the way for the nullification of Blaine amendments across the country. Just explain that.
Yeah.
And then later you have the thing about the Latter-day Saints and so forth, but just explain that, the whole Blaine thing and all that.
Yeah, the Blaine amendments were really quite remarkable. James Blaine was a politician from Maine, originally from Pennsylvania, went up to Maine and was elected to Congress, became Speaker of the House of Representatives, also served as Secretary of State, and
Yeah,
was a candidate for president. And he proposed an amendment to the Constitution that would prohibit the use of taxpayer money for religious education. and it passed the House. It did not pass the Senate enough to be ratified, but 37 states adopted some version of the Blaine Amendment, which I think for more than a century was a kind of a bright line in this separation of church and state, the use of
Yeah,
taxpayer funds for religious education. And now what we see, of course, as you know, in Oklahoma, Iowa, Florida, and other places, Texas, where the taxpayer money is used to support religious or sectarian education. And let me just make my little quick case for public education. And we need to specify as well that evangelicals were very much involved in
yeah,
the organization of, they were called common schools in the 19th century, or public education. And they saw this as a way for those on the lower rungs of society to become more upwardly mobile.
yeah,
And so, and they supported public education for religious, faith-based
sure.
reasons. And I think public education is one of the treasures of American life. It's unfortunately it's fading fast, but this is the one place in society where children of different religious backgrounds, racial backgrounds, even socioeconomic backgrounds can come together in the classroom, on the playground, and learn how to get along with one another.
Yeah,
And that to me sounds like a recipe for democracy.
yeah,
I'm perfectly willing to acknowledge that that's an idealized version, and
sure.
public education hasn't always lived up to that ideal. But it seems to me if we lose that, we also lose the future of democracy, because this is in many ways, public schools were the proving ground for democracy. And if we care about the future of the nation, I think we have to care about public education. And I say that as a proud alumnus of public education myself. And I think it's terribly, terribly important.
Yeah. You talk about the fact that the second recent strategy for the advance of Christian nationalism is positively Trumpian, simply declare that all evidence to the contrary, notwithstanding the United States has always and always has been and always has been a Christian nation. The driving force behind this campaign, someone you already mentioned, is David Barton, a faux historian who has crafted an entire career out of asserting that the founders were evangelical Christians. And then later you say Barton and his right-wing compatriots also like to assert that the founders themselves were evangelical Christians. This is so ludicrous that I'm tempted to not dignify it with a response. Many of the founders were deists who understood God as a remote and distant, disinterested entity. John Adams recoiled at the notion of Jesus as incarnate deity, which he thought was, quote, the source of almost all the corruptions of Christianity. I guess speaking of homeschoolers and the rest of it who want to give their kids a Christian education, talk for a minute, because you're a historian, about just not just this, but so much falsification of American history
Yeah,
just across the board. It's
yeah,
just like if we don't like it, we'll ignore it or say it never happened.
yeah,
Again, I'm 73 right now, and I've seen a lot of different things in my lifetime and been pretty connected and politically aware, even though at the beginning of my life as an adult, that was from the right, but nevertheless, ear to the ground. There's never been a moment in my lifetime like this where the agreed upon facts of history are just denied
yeah.
wholesale.
That's right. Yeah. Well, anything that's inconvenient and doesn't fit into this kind of triumphalist white
Yeah,
colonialist narrative is swept aside. And even as you know, now under Trump, in museums, the Smithsonian and so forth, the whitewashing, and I use that
sure.
verb
No pun.
advisedly, whitewashing of slavery,
Yeah,
uh, of the horrendous treatment of Native Americans
yeah,
throughout American history. All of that is somehow just being wiped away. And you have the governor of Florida declaring that slavery was good vocational training for for
yeah,
African
great.
Americans. I mean, it's so preposterous that
Yeah.
it's just uh, a scandal. And this is what we're facing right now. And
Where,
it's
where do you
you know
where do you
it's
see all that going? Because I can't write, I've written novels as part of my way I earn a living, but I can't write an ending to this one. I just have no idea how to predict. I mean, what are some scenarios here? Because followed to its logical conclusion, the falsification of history,
yeah.
the fake facts being replacing things that have never been challenged by anybody of any party. Um, it's hard to see how this plays out. I mean, you can do a fictitious version of sort of Handmaid's Tale type stuff, but in reality, you have mayhem as a word that you use in your book at one point, and chaos. And I'm just curious to your own views, both in this book and how you just see things as a historian, as an American, as a Christian. I mean, where does this go?
Yeah. Well, it's not pretty. I mean, if I had to choose a novel that wrote the conclusion to this, it'd probably be 1984 with George Orwell.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
mean, where you have the state, just utterly dictating what people believe, what they think, and trying to dictate their reality.
Yeah.
And I think this is happening now. I mean, we have a fabulist as president
Yeah.
of the United States who. Um,
Tearing down the East Wing as we speak,
I
replace it
mean,
with the Gilded Ballroom. I mean, it's insane. That's just that alone is off another page. Who would have imagined that could be possible?
and after promising that the that the White House as it stands now would not be affected by this. I mean, not that any of his promises are good for anything, but this is just it's surreal what's happening right now.
Yeah,
So the and one of the reasons I wrote the book, Frank, is that I think truth is a powerful antidote, and
absolutely.
it may be the only one we have right now.
Yeah.
And so when you have people running around saying that America is a Christian nation, all the founders were evangelical Christians, and all this utter nonsense,
Yeah.
I think it's important to have truth as an antidote to that and say, no, this is not the case. And what I tried to do in the book is, provide what ammunition, maybe not the best image to invoke right now, but some ballast to provide a response to what's going on.
Well, the book is really useful in a lot of ways. First of all, it does present the truth, but secondly, it encourages people who seek after something that isn't just straight algorithmic down the rabbit hole propaganda. You know, there are tech bro masters tell us to just look at things we agree with. One hopes that there's some teacher out there, homeschool mom, student, teenager who wants to actually figure out what happened here when they hear about all these claims. And your book is mercifully direct and well written and easy to read. So I think you provided a tool for us all to give people and to talk about. So let me just talk a little more about the book here. Again, Randall teaches at Dartmouth, but right now we're talking about America's Best Idea, the separation of church and state. And we're going to make this a February has to be read book club offering. We also want to do more to promote this and link to it and so on. So when we sign off here, I'm not quite ready to do that, but when we do, I'll sign off. But then would you stick around and just talk to Ernie Gregg, our producer, for a little bit so that we can make sure we coordinate properly to promote the book and also get your ideas on any other guests we ought to be talking to, because this is a subject we're so interested in. I'm asking you to subscribe right now on YouTube to In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer, which you've been listening to, and to my Substack, It Has to Be Said, at frankschaeffer.substack.com. And you can also follow my new project at thegospelofzip.com, which launches November 1. And I hope you all pay attention to that. But in the moment, would you hold the book up one more time? Because I read mine on Kindle. I want you to look for that book in a bookstore. Make sure you read it. And if you're in any kind of parenting and or teaching and or communications profession of any kind, invite Randall to talk to you on your podcast, but also just see that people know about this book, because it is a small finger in the dike of a tidal wave of lies that's coming at us, well funded from the right, with incredible backing by some of our tech bros like Peter Thiel and others. It's a mind-boggling moment of history. Speaking of the founding fathers you talk about, I mean, what would they make of this? If Jefferson got in a time capsule and came here for 10 minutes, well, watch the East Wing being bulldozed as we speak. Not that the East Wing had been built in Jefferson's time, but nevertheless, what would be the thoughts of these guys?
I think Jefferson would be aghast at what's happening right now, and probably also flummoxed that there was not an uprising to oppose it. Now we had a nice uprising this past Sunday or past Saturday with the No Kings rallies, and
Yeah,
I addressed one here out in California, but that's a start. And I
Yeah,
think, frankly, Frank, and without trying flatter you too much, that what you're doing is very important. The podcasts, I think, and people have asked me about this before, and my response is the way we respond is by doing our part,
yeah,
as even as insignificant as it seems, because I think the aggregate effect of that is going to make a difference. And as
yeah.
I said earlier, I think truth is a powerful antidote. There's a lot of lying going on out there, not merely from the president who has a documented history of it, but from other people who are in his camp, who
Yeah.
are just who are fabulists as well. And we have to keep fighting back with the truth. So when someone says, "Yes, the United States has always been a Christian nation,"
Yeah. Not
no,
true.
that's demonstrably false.
Yeah.
And I try to provide some evidence to shore up that argument.
Well, and you made this point a dozen times in this interview, and I made it too, but we'll say it one more time, wrapping it up. The people who will lose the most
Yes,
in treasure, influence, position are evangelical Christians who have prospered more than any single group because of the separation of church and state.
absolutely.
And if they
Absolutely.
don't believe me, just take a look at all these, quote, Christian countries of Europe, whether they're Catholic, Protestant, or whatever. How many people are going to Calvinist churches in Geneva on
Right.
Sunday? Not
Right.
many.
Right. Not
Um,
many.
so
That's right.
hasn't worked out so well.
It hasn't
Where
worked
you
out.
have Catholic cantons in Switzerland, that's states, and Protestant states, and they
Yeah.
all had to declare one way or another, and then that was the state church, and
Yeah.
they're all empty.
All empty.
Doesn't
Yep.
work.
Yep. That's right. Yeah.
So listen, hold your book up one more time. Run out and get the book, please, everybody. America's Best Idea and The Separation of Church and State. It's a terrific book. I've had the pleasure of reading it, quoted as much as I could jam in here and hardly let Randall talk because I wanted to read his book out loud to you.
That's all right.
Hey, but at least you know this interviewer read it.
That's right.
Right.
It doesn't always happen. We both know that.
We know about the skimming types, but I'm not one of them, and certainly not for your book. But Randall, I know this is an odd way to end this, but I love you dearly. I really do. You're one of the bright lights out there. So keep shining for all of us, please.
And you too, Frank.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
talk soon. Stick around and talk to our